Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to bring you my February wrap-up. As you may know, February in the United States is Black History Month, and to celebrate I took part in black-a-thon and made a commitment to exclusively read books by Black authors. The first thing I listened to in February was My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, read by Odepero Oduye. This is an own voices story that presents an interesting fusion of the thriller, literary, and contemporary genres. It's set in Nigeria and it's about this nurse named Korode whose sister, Ayola, has a tendency to brutally murder her boyfriends, leaving Korode to literally clean up the mess. Naturally, she feels conflicted because she knows her sister should be held accountable for her crimes, but her instincts tell her that family comes first no matter what. That is, until Ayola comes to visit Korode's workplace for the first time and acquires an interest in a handsome doctor who Korode also happens to like. This story is so jarring and compelling because you have this phenomenon of murder that's so obviously a disruption of normal life, but at the same time there's such great attention to the almost mundane emotional nuances of Korode's day-to-day existence. That's why I think this story has somewhat literary elements, because every detail is rich with emotion and subtext. There's such a distinct emotional landscape of all the dynamics in Korode's life, and we get these poignant flashbacks to Korode and Ayola's childhood with their father who was angry and abusive, and absolutely all of that informs the energy of this text. This book has so much to offer in terms of exploring the push and pull dynamic of the enabled versus the enabler and the elaborate social gymnastics Korode has to perform just to maintain the facade of a normal family life, to protect her sister who she's only ever wanted to protect. But at the same time, that creates a toxic family dynamic where she isn't able to move forward with her own life because her enabling is all-consuming and because she's created this environment where Ayola doesn't have to be accountable for anything she does. It's definitely about Korode figuring out what the limit is, where the breaking point is going to be, and asking herself what matters most, sweeping her sister's mistakes under the rug or confronting all of these bodies and the traumas that led them to make these choices. I really enjoyed this and I thought it was that much more powerful for its brevity and its insight, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read my poetry collection for the month, and since I've started reviewing poetry on this channel, this was actually the first time I've gone back to read another collection from a poet I love, and that collection was Black Movie by Denez Smith. This collection is unique in that it discusses how Blackness should be portrayed in media and how it should be at the forefront of our culture as Americans, and it does that by reimagining films if they had been Black, or pitching trailers or concepts for Black films that should exist. Not only that, but this collection expresses a deep sense of sadness, anger, helplessness, and frustration towards America's insistence that violence against Black communities be silenced or dismissed. Each piece is framed with a conviction that seems to say, look at these things you don't want to see, you fucking cowards. And that's exactly what makes this such a powerfully resonant collection of poems. Denez Smith has a singular talent of making the reader fixate on these uneasy truths, on the endless list of our culture's inherent failings, and they do not offer you a way out or a sense of comfort. They tell it like it is, they celebrate and explore queerness and Blackness in a way that's almost a huge middle finger to the universe, and I love that. As I touched on, there's a sense of defiance in the way they write, in a way that seems to say, this is the world, you made it this way, and even though there are spots of light, it is deeply, deeply fucked up. And if that isn't the truth, I don't know what is. Incredible work as always. I gave this collection 5 stars. After that, I listened to A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole, read by Karen Chilton. This is an own voices romance story about a struggling grad student and former foster kid, Naledi Smith, who continuously gets these emails claiming that she's betrothed to some far-off African prince. Assuming that these emails are an elaborate scheme to steal her identity, Naledi automatically deletes them as soon as they show up in her inbox. But on the other end of that interaction is a very real prince named Tabiso, the sole heir to the kingdom of Thesolo, with a lot of expectations to live up to, and he is determined to find his missing princess no matter what. So his assistant is actually able to figure out where Naledi attends grad school, and once he's actually in front of her, Tabiso cannot resist posing as a commoner and seeing where this goes. This romance has a lot of delightful tropes that I'm always down to read about. There's undercover royalty, lust at first sight, childhood sweethearts, mistaken identity. I really have a soft spot for those tropes, and I feel like they were done really well in this case. What I really appreciate is that Tabiso especially is not a perfect love interest who actually fucks up pretty bad a lot of times. But being around Naledi, he's able to fine-tune his sensitivity and his awareness, and he's able to acknowledge his mistakes. It's very rare to have so many genuine, mature exchanges between two grown adults, and you see that a lot in this book. Something else that kept me grounded in this story was Naledi's realness. As a not rich black woman working and studying in STEM, as a former foster kid, as a current waitress, she has been mistreated and dismissed in so many ways, and that means her guard is always up when it comes to any question of romance. Thabiso has to really come to understand what she's been through and the barriers and struggles she's faced and continues to face, and that's ultimately what shifts this from being a casual sexual attraction to a deeply connected relationship. This story is unapologetically feminist, provides a running commentary on society. It's a story that holds its characters accountable at every turn, and those are things I very much appreciate. Now, the biggest drawback for me was that the sex was a little over the top in terms of cheesiness and cliche sexual terminology, and also because I think the story wrapped up a little quickly in a way that was somewhat convenient. But I do love a good happy ending, and I definitely look forward to reading more from this author and more books in this series. I gave this one a strong 3.5 stars. Then, somewhat spontaneously, I listened to Hunger by Roxane Gay, read by the author herself. This is a harrowing, painfully honest memoir in which Roxane Gay invites the reader to share in the story of her body, and she offers up her own emotional and psychological struggles as a springboard to explore our culture's shared anxieties about health and appearance and self-image. Roxane Gay is someone who's been very open about her weight, her struggle with weight, and here she traces that back to when she was raped as a child, and she explores how our bodies are these complex vessels that both withstand and reflect so many things. The sheer amount of grit it must have taken Roxane Gay to look inwards and to deliberately put words to her traumas, her shames, her fears in such a public forum is something I can't even process. It is terrifying to expose yourself like this, to offer up your own body and your own privacy in order to shed light on our culture's obsession and almost pathologic fear and hatred of fatness. And yet, she's done it. The biggest compliment I can give this memoir is that despite so many potentially dicey subjects, it strikes such a fine balance. It's not just about trauma, it's not about Roxane Gay exposing her deepest, darkest shames for the audience's satisfaction, it's not about unchecked body positivity, it's not about losing weight or discovering a path to self-love despite all the challenges. The body itself is a complex journey and a never-ending conversation that is impacted by so many factors, and here Roxane Gay is able to explore those factors without falling into the trap of providing an easy answer or dropping off the reader at a definitive endpoint. By the end, she's in a place where she can say, there are things about my body that I love, there are things that I hate, there are things I'm ashamed about because of my own reactions, and things I should not have to be ashamed about because our society has failed fat bodies in so many ways. All of her success, all of the opportunities she's had, all of the impact she's made while disrupting modern culture and discourse has been achieved in the body she has, and there is power in claiming that for herself. This is a truly extraordinary memoir that is so real and forthright in all the ways that count. It was an automatic 5 stars. After that, from my library, I read The Kingdom of Gods by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third and final book in the Inheritance trilogy, and a running theme in each book is the idea of an extremely powerful god in this universe becoming human or grappling with humanity in some way, and that was definitely a big part of this book. Each book can stand on its own, but this installment is about the insufferable trickster godling Sia, who makes a pact with these 2 Adameti children, and for some reason the connection they have together creates a powerful, magical disruption of the universe itself. And they kind of inadvertently summon forth the Maelstrom, which is the dark, shapeless void of creation itself, and they have to find a way to rebalance the universe. As a quick sidebar before I get into my thoughts, can I just say that I'm always pleasantly surprised when I remember that literally all of N.K. Jemisin's books celebrate queerness and sexuality and polyamorous relationships in some way, because it's freaking fantastic. What's really clever about the Inheritance trilogy is that it uses these 3 huge sweeping narrative arcs to weave together this incredibly imagined, nuanced, expansive universe. Jemisin is masterful in the way she explores the dichotomy of divinity versus humanity, especially as she has these characters who traverse between both states and who have to change their very nature in order to exist. Sia has always been especially interesting to me as a petty, mischievous trickster god who is incredibly malleable and who wants to feel needed and loved above everything else. He can make people feel a range of emotions from annoyance to pain to suffering, and he almost seems to gain his power from that, which brings him a deep sense of satisfaction and delight. But now, when faced with his own mortality while coming to grips with the limits of his involuntary humanity, he is losing that power, and he has to change the way he thinks and acts and reacts. It's really really fascinating to see him grapple with those changes. And as I've said before, N.K. Jemisin is the queen of showing why disruption and agitation of the natural order of things are necessary components for humanity to evolve and advance, and that was definitely present in this book. So overall, a really wonderful finale from a wonderful author. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Then I read Destroyer by Victor LaValle and Dietrich Smith. This is a badass comic that reimagines Mary Shelley's Frankenstein within the socio-political context of the present-day United States. Basically, Victor Frankenstein's original monster is still out there terrorizing the world and murdering every last human in sight, but there's also an exiled scientist named Dr. Baker, a descendant of the Frankenstein family, who is recreating Victor's experiments. She lost her husband and then she lost her son when he was unjustly shot and killed by the police, which is why she's trying to bring her son back to life as a high-tech, supercharged weapon to help her exact her revenge. It is wild to me how this comic seamlessly blends classic science fiction with contemporary issues and sensibilities. They're two seemingly different worlds, but this comic draws attention to so many important parallels. Where Victor Frankenstein's original monster was exiled and persecuted for being this unnatural form of life, Dr. Baker has also been exiled and dismissed as a woman, as a female scientist, as a mother, as someone who has lost a child to senseless systemic violence. And that experience of being typecast and pushed to the margins has made them both furious and hungry for revenge. They have lost themselves to hopelessness, but at the same time that anger gives them a form of power and motivation and strength. I think Victor LaValle says it best in his author's note. He says, "I wonder which seems more fantastical, that a woman could bring her dead son back to life, or that our country might ever hold itself accountable for the injustices it has perpetrated." And folks, if that ain't the realest shit. He also talks about how he purposefully made her son Akai someone who is not inherently violent, someone who is gentle and hopeful, because combating senseless violence with senseless violence and despair is not the way out of this mess. This was extremely thoughtful, thrilling, impactful, and I gave the entire volume 4 stars. And the last thing I listened to, you might have guessed, was Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James, read by Dion Graham. This is an ambitious fantasy novel infused with African mythology and folklore. It's about a man known only as Tracker who has the superhuman ability to follow the scent of anyone he meets, no matter how far away they get, up until the moment that person dies. Basically, he's hired to track down this young boy who seems to be extremely important to several parties for reasons he doesn't understand yet. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, rape, a plethora of graphic violence, graphic descriptions of gore, and also scenes where adults have sexual contact with characters described as young boys. I went into this book with high expectations, but ultimately I feel like it's overhyped, and despite how so many awesome reviewers have lauded this book as groundbreaking and unique and incredibly subversive, I was personally left with middle-of-the-road feelings. What really works here is a masterful sense of storytelling. This story is deeply embedded in the oral tradition, and we often get large swaths of narrative detail through the mechanic of characters telling other characters' stories. So I really appreciate how the story unfolds and how each new tale slightly overlaps the one that came before, so that the world slowly builds itself on the page. That mechanism also reveals Tracker's emotional dilemma of not knowing what to believe, what to do next, who to trust, because not every voice in the mix is a truthful or trustworthy voice. Does he act on the information he just received? Does he put his faith in this reality that's just been woven, or will doing so just set him back or even threaten his life? So I feel like I understood the urgency of the world, the psychology of the character, and I connected with his inner conflict, but there wasn't really anything about him that elevated my cursory sense of investment. I enjoyed some of the fantastical concepts at play, the incorporation of folklore and mythological creatures, but there's a part of me that feels like this story was a little too over the top, a bit oversold, and it definitely could have been told in less space. Ultimately, it just feels like a magnification of what you would expect from a male-written, male-driven fantasy narrative, and I'm not trying to be reductive by saying that, I can only call it as I see it. So there's a lot of expressing masculinity via displays of extreme violence or hypersexuality. There's a hyper-focus on like literally everybody's genitalia and pretty much all the female characters in this world getting absolutely shit on. It's a lot. Which is not to say that all of those elements go completely unchallenged, but it was definitely arduous and took a toll on my reading experience. One of the more interesting subversions is how the story explores queerness and a fluidity of gender and sexuality through Tracker and some other characters, but that's pretty much it. Not gonna lie, I'm a little bit bitter and let down by this one. I really appreciate the artistry and the thought behind it, but it took a lot out of me to get to the end of this book. I gave it 3 stars. So those are all the books I read in February. I did start Little and Lion by Brandy Colbert, which I've been enjoying very much and will most likely be done with by the time you see this, so keep an eye out for that one in my March wrap-up. As always, if you've read any of these books yourself, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below, or if you have a favorite book that you read from last month, I would love to hear about that as well. But that's everything I have for this wrap-up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!